head on over to Amazon and buy your copy of Trauma Bonded, a true story of navigating attachments forged in complex PTSD by me, Sarah Westbrook.
No, but the idea is if you're using words like charity or love, there's going to be lots of interpretations of that. It's going to mean different things for different people all along the way. And so if we get so stuck on the words, again, kind of the loading the language thing, if we get so stuck on our definition of that word, it causes us the less ability or inability to meet with someone on an emotional plane, to have a bonding experience with someone instead of arguing about the terms that we're going through. But what I wanted to say about this quote again is if you recognize...
Did you say the quote? I don't think you ever said the quote from Luna.
I'm talking about the Jewish quote.
Oh, okay,
so the
go
connection
ahead.
that I have is to another quote from Luna in their book. If you're able to take away the connection of sin being a deliberate, essentially, attack on God, if you take away that connection, then you start to recognize how that thought or that connection is a control maneuver. And this is how they say it in here. This is on page 161 down near the middle. If you've ever wondered, they say, if you've ever wondered why the church spends more time promoting chastity than charity, and why sexual sin seems more abhorrent than fraud, extortion, and murder, this is why. Instinctual drives become demonized so that you have no choice but to fail. This proves the church doctrinal position that mankind is in a fallen state and we need the help of the Savior. Sexuality, impure thoughts, selfish desires, language, clothing, food, music, personal interest, and leisure time are brought under the domain of purity. And mostly I want to bring connection to the fact that if you have no choice but to fail, you're set up to need something else from someone. In this case, the organization directs you either to the organization in general or to Jesus, but it's all under the wings of this organization.
Right. It directs you to Jesus in the way that the organization defines who or what Jesus or God is. Right. Rather than healing within yourself so that you feel inside of you more true to you, because this clouds your ability to have an individual identity separate from the organization. Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the things that I've struggled with most in leaving Mormonism, is trying to figure out where the heck I am now. Because so much of my identity and so much of my belief system is tangled up in Mormonism that it's really difficult to untangle it. My thought process, I'm medical, my thought process is if you tried to untangle a helix of DNA, it would be very difficult, if not impossible, to untangle it, to pull something out of it, and then try and put it back together. You would change the DNA. And so that's kind of where I'm at, is that it's so difficult to untangle it all and put things back together that I feel like I almost have to start over. Well, and on that same line, Mason, one of the things that's very interesting is that, we talk in my field a lot about enmeshed boundaries, meaning that they're not really clear. They're kind of all over the place. Right. It's hard to define what one is, where one starts, where one ends. And I feel like when you're stuck in a cult, your identity becomes enmeshed because you're so focused on trying to fit into what the standards, morals, and directions are of the organization that you lose yourself. Like, it's very difficult because you're spending so much time. We talked about time control. You're spending so much time and there's so much effort into making sure that you fit into this mold so that you don't fail or lose something. On page 285 of this book, when Lindsay is talking about double binds, they say double binds occur when promises cannot be fulfilled. And frankly, existential promises, we never get to see the fulfillment of those. So you're constantly living in fear of something that nobody can actually demonstrate whether or not it happens. And, they also say, Luna also says the power of the double bind is in its invisibility. And that's, Mason, can you read the rest of that quote on page 285 for me?
Yeah, this is one of the things I wanted to read anyway, so yeah.
Oh, so you'll read it because you already wanted to, not
yes,
because
I've
wanted to?
refused to read so much today.
Oh my gosh.
Part of the victim's denial system is the inability to believe that someone they love so much could consciously and callously hurt them. It therefore becomes easier to rationalize the leader's behavior as necessary for the general or individual good. The alternative for the devotee would be to face the sudden and overwhelming awareness of being victimized, deceived, used. Such a realization would wound the person's deepest sense of self, so as a means of self-protection, the person denies the abuse. When and if the devotee becomes aware of the exploitation, it feels as though a tremendous evil has been done, a spiritual rape.
Yeah, and I think that, where was it? I was listening to, I think it was the Bill Reel interviews on Mormon stories. So recently, John DeLynn interviewed Bill and Amanda Reel for like 9 hours, and it was mostly Bill's story. Like in the beginning, they agreed we're mostly going to talk about Bill's story. And one of the things that Bill was talking about was that not being a truth teller is so harmful to everybody in the organization. Because when you're in the organization and you are literally dedicating every aspect of your life to this organization, that when you discover that your leaders have purposefully lied to you or hidden things from you, it shakes your foundation. But because the brain doesn't like to accept new information, especially when that new information is uncomfortable, it becomes this crisis. You know, we talk about a crisis of faith, but when you're trying to walk away from a cult-like organization, you're also experiencing a crisis of identity because it's all enmeshed. You cannot tell where the person begins and the person ends from where the religion begins and the religion ends. It's all stuck together. And the problem is, at least in Mormonism, is that we're supposed to be proud of this enmeshment, when in actuality, it's incredibly dangerous. When I was, earlier when I said I wanted to kind of tie this, actually, before I do that, Mason, was there anything else you wanted to read or say before I move into the PTSD symptoms?
There's one more thing I want to talk about just with the double bind here. Because of this, the nature of the double bind, there's a really good example here. And I wanted to share the example because I work with examples, analogies that really work for me. And I've actually had this thought before, but this is on page 285, and Luna is quoting philosopher Sam Keen, who describes it using a poetic Garden of Eden metaphor. Quote, "If we experiment and break the taboos, we may be punished, and we will certainly feel guilty and be cast out of the garden. But if we do not, if we remain obedient children, we will feel the shame that comes from never exercising our freedom and from living our own lives within the garden of the authorities. If we disobey, we will have to wrestle with guilt and autonomy. If we obey, we will have to wrestle with shame and dependency." So the idea of a double bind is the
damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Yeah, lose-lose situation. But oftentimes in here, they're giving examples of lose-lose for me, win-win for the organization. Mm-hmm. And so, it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't. And if you think about Mormonism's take on the Garden of Eden, they could either completely obey and not live up to what their potential is supposed to be, or they can disobey and feel guilt for having made mistakes and sinned against God. And now what happens is Christianity immediately inserts the need for a savior. Right from the very beginning, oh, you guys screwed this up. Well, you know what? I'm going to make it okay. I'm going to make a way for you to come back, but it's going to require an awful lot from you for a decision that, in this case, Mormonism calls them children. It's a decision that children made, thinking they were doing the best that they could. Now they're essentially punished forever without the help of some other individual. And the idea sort of makes sense, but it is very controlling. It's very It owns you.
Right. Well, because we've turned Jesus now into the whipping boy, because it doesn't matter how much we apologize or feel remorseful, Jesus has to get hurt in order for justice to be served. And for me, it's a really toxic way and a really toxic relationship with a higher power to think that every time I mess up, he gets hurt.